called the Gangmaster Licensing Authority and Power to Impose Civil Fines, in the name of the Honourable Stephen Barclay.
Thank you, Mr. Hollybone, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. This time last year, I held a debate on the Gangmasters Licensing Authority on the 20th of June 2012. And the then Minister, my neighbour and colleague, the member for Cambridge South East, assured the House that he had, and I quote, a package of proposed changes to the GLA, including looking at the scope to use civil penalties. Indeed, he very kindly went on to say that I was right in calling for the ability to fine gangmasters, saying the GLA board has very few enforcement weapons and that we needed a tier of measures for it to utilise. So it therefore may surprise the House and you, Mr. Hollybone, to learn that despite the Minister saying that this analysis was right, the Department's own consultation now specifically excludes the tier of measures to which my colleague was referring. And I think we should remind ourselves as to what is at stake. I'm very pleased to see the member for Morecambe in his place. He will know that the GLA was set up in 2004 after the tragedy of the Morecambe Bay cockle-pickers disaster, and he has spoken most effectively at bringing those issues to the attention of the House before. But this is a piece of legislation directed at protecting the most vulnerable people within society, particularly those working in the agricultural sector, many cases a long way from home with language difficulties, fearful of authority, and therefore vulnerable people who do need protecting. And it is remarkable that the consultation brought forward by the Department seems to be excluding the measure that the Minister, in response to my debate last year, said was an important tool that was lacking and needed to be included. It may therefore be helpful, Mr. Hollybone, if I set up, well, why do I think the Department has got itself into this situation? And I think it's in large measure down to another ministerial debate. I know we all like cross-departmental working, and it's very good that the Department is taking note of ministerial statements elsewhere. And my colleague, the Right Honourable Member for Sevenoaks, quite rightly articulated concerns with red tape. It's an issue I know many colleagues in the House share. And the member for Sevenoaks therefore set out a new test whereby it was a general rule that new powers to fine should not apply to firms with less than 250 people. And I think there's a good logic to bringing in that measure. But it was a general rule. It wasn't absolute. And it seems officials, and the Minister may want to clarify whether it's officials, obviously it's signed off by ministers, but there almost seems to be a bit of gold plating here, where what is a general rule has been applied in absolute terms. Because, of course, most gangmasters don't employ more than 250 people. Indeed, if they did, their existing powers, Mr. Hollybone, would be confined just to those above 250. But we don't do that for the criminal powers. So is it not illogical that for criminal powers, we say it applies to the gangmaster population as a whole? And yet for civil powers, one assumes a lower test, we increase the bar. And we say it only applies to gangmasters with more than 250 people working for them. So not only is it at odds with what the Minister said to me this time last year in response to my debate, it's also at odds with the existing legislation under which the Department is acting. It's also, dare I say, at odds with common sense. Because if you look at the use of criminal powers, it is clearly not working. If we take, for example, two recent cases in Northern Ireland, in those cases, there are fines imposed on the gangmasters acting illegally, making large sums of money, often not paying tax, quite often linked to other crime like prostitution, counterfeiting, and other issues. The two fines imposed in Northern Ireland were just £500 apiece. Well, clearly, I think most colleagues would accept that the profits those gangmasters have made far exceeded the fines that they were imposed by the courts. So we have a strange situation where we have criminal powers which the GLA rarely uses. If the gangmaster is unlucky enough to be caught, they know that the fine is likely to be less than the profits that they've made. They know that on most occasions witnesses are very fearful of coming forward, and therefore the number of prosecutions is very low. And if we take last year as an example, just 15 prosecutions, Mr. Hollowbone, against gangmasters. And let's put that in context. We have currently underway, and I'm very grateful to the Home Secretary for the support that she has given, but we have an operation underway in the Fens, which my colleague, the member for Peterborough, will be familiar with, which is Operation Pheasant, which so far has raided 80 homes. It has a number of live inquiries, but is finding the most horrendous issues. We had a case recently in Whittlesea where migrant labour was living in a house where there is CCTV not just on the front and back door, but on the inside rooms as well, in order that the gangmaster can control his labour force. We've had other cases of people living in a garage with an open sewer. And this is an issue not just for the vulnerable within communities like mine and the member for Peterborough, but it's also an issue for the local residents. Because where you have high concentrations of houses of multiple occupation, then you have antisocial behaviour. It's very difficult for people to stay in a house, so they then tend to go out and street drink. When they street drink, you get urination on people's front doors. And I cited some particularly unpleasant and disturbing cases in the debate last year, and I won't detain the House by rerunning those. But it's very clear there are issues of antisocial behaviour and very legitimate concerns for the local population which flow back to our unwillingness to tackle gangmasters. And therefore I suggest to the House that the key way we should be tackling gangmasters is hitting them in the area they're most concerned about. And that's in their pocket. It's through fines. I think that is the way that you change their behaviour. And so I find it quite remarkable that this consultation from the GLA is actually excluding a tool that the Minister said is important, is gold-plating a legitimate concern of the member for Sevenoaks, but applying that in a bizarre and arbitrary way. That is failing to address the legitimate concerns of antisocial behaviour with enforcement because the criminal tools they use are not working. They're rarely applied. Prosecutions, 15 prosecutions, clearly shows it's not working. And then when you do get the prosecutions, the level of fine is derisory. And I do say to the Minister that I do find it quite disappointing that I should, as a Member of Parliament, articulate very real concerns affecting my constituency, that the Home Secretary acts on those concerns with Operation Pheasant, that we have good support from Cambridgeshire Police, and in the debate last night I paid tribute to Inspector Sissons and the work that he is doing. I'm keen that my local council does more, and I have been in active discussions to ensure that they use their powers. And I'm very sympathetic to the difficulties of resourcing that the GLA has, because we all know that the last government left us with a huge level of debt. And whilst I do believe the GLA should be far better resourced, and I think that would be a good use of the budget of the department, I'm very sympathetic to the difficulties the department faces because of what they inherited. But surely the answer to that, if you have a problem in trying to resource it more, is to make it easier to prosecute, to make it easier to impose fines, because it's the fines that will change the behaviour of the gangmasters. And this isn't all gangmasters, there are perfectly respectable gangmasters. But we know there are illegal gangmasters. We know there are heartbreaking issues of abuse taking place in my constituency and in the constituency of colleagues across the fence. And we know there's unwarranted pressure being placed on local residents who often have to bear the consequences of the antisocial behaviour that flows from this concentration of houses of multiple occupation and the lack of enforcement against illegal gangmasters who often misleadingly attract people from overseas. So, for example, they will go to Lithuania and say, come to the Fens, you have a guaranteed job, guaranteed accommodation. And yet, often when they arrive, there's only 2 days' work, 1 day's work, 3 days' work until they exhaust their savings, they're then in debt, and the gangmasters have control. So there are very real issues. These issues were raised last year. Other departments have gripped it and have acted. Likewise, my colleague, the local government minister, is organising a workshop in the Fens, but in Wisbech, but for a number of councils, in order that we share best practice. Other departments are acting. My colleague's department is not. And not only is it not acting, but it's ignoring the assurances that were given to me, or I felt were given to me, by my interpretation of what the minister said last year. I hope, therefore, in bringing this debate before the House again today, that my colleague will look again at his consultation. Look again at whether the powers it equips the GLA with are adequate. If he wants to take this opportunity to announce additional resource for the Fens, I would be delighted. But if he's not going to do that, then exactly what is he going to do?
Making a powerful and a fluent case, and I pay tribute to his great campaigning work on this issue. Does he agree with me that time is of the essence, and the imperative is to do something soon? Because as a result of the Free Movement Directive and the likely immigration of Romanian and Bulgarian immigrants next year, that given that the Home Secretary has said how important reducing pull factors are, this is part of that portfolio of policies, and therefore the urgency is very much apparent in this particular area.
Well, my neighbour and colleague is absolutely right. It is the urgency, and it's for that reason that I'm sure he shares my frustration. There's a number of us have raised these concerns now for some time. That I had a debate on this issue last year. That I've raised them in the chamber. I've been to see the Home Secretary on a number of occasions. The police inspector came down and saw Lynn Hamer, the top official of HMRC, with me last year. And if cross-departmental government is to work, then DEFRA needs to come to the party. It needs to get involved. And I hope the purpose of today's debate is to draw the consultation before the Minister more firmly to his attention. I think there has been a misinterpretation of the ministerial statement by the member for Sevenoaks. I hope there's some reassurance he can give us today. But ultimately, if not, I think what I am hoping he can address is exactly the concern of the member for Peterborough. What is it that his department, through the GLA, are going to do to effect change on the ground? Because if we are going to maintain this community cohesion, that matters. If we're going to address the antisocial behaviour that flows from the consequences and the criminal action of the illegal gangmasters, then the GLA has to be part of the action that is taken. And I therefore hope that the Minister will be able to provide some reassurance to the House that the comments of his predecessor will now form a part of the consultation and the response to what happens in tackling illegal gangmasters operating in the Fens. Thank you very much.